Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. Trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hlliard Macbeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hlliard.
Nice to be on the show again.
Hlliard, the major oil production facility in Saudi Arabia was attacked by drones or drone. It was on fire. It looked pretty spectacular. It's 5% of the world's oil production, apparently. The Saudis promise it'll be back online and producing even more oil once they get it repaired. And they say the repair shouldn't take that long, but the attack itself is pretty fascinating. Who did it, or do we really know?
I don't think we know yet. The president of the United States, Trump, has said that Iran was behind it. The Houthi rebels who are in a battle with the Saudis in Yemen, they claimed responsibility, but it seems like it's a pretty sophisticated attack because this is a very large installation. This installation is a key element. I read some reports on it, and it produces, as you mentioned, 5% of the world's oil. It processes that much now. The Saudis produce about 10 million barrels a day, and as much as 2/3 of their production goes through this one plant. So, and because of that, it's long been considered to be one of the most important and sensitive processing plants in the world. Although I'd never heard of it before, and probably most people hadn't heard of it before. And it was very well protected. So it makes you wonder. Now, according to the reports I read, the Yemen is south of where the Saudi processing facility is, and the drones or the unmanned aircraft that attacked came from the north. So it's either one report said they might have even come from inside Saudi Arabia. Another one said they might have come from Iraq, and another one said they came from Iran. So it looks like they came from the north. But one of the questions is, when I think of a drone, I've seen people have these little drones, and they have cameras on them, and it's kind of neat, actually. I was thinking about getting one, but I didn't. But I don't think these are the same kind of drones that they're talking about there.
Yes. So what kind of drone attacked this facility? Was it something that you could buy, off eBay, or something big and military?
Well, so in June, you might remember there was that drone that was shot down by the Iranians, and they claimed that it was a U.S. surveillance drone, and the U.S. has admitted it was. And they said it was over Iranian territories, and they said they gave a warning. But these vehicles these aircraft have no pilot, so I don't know who they gave the warning to. But anyway, the whoever was controlling that drone didn't respond, and so the Iranians shot it down. And then you might remember that President Trump was literally 5 minutes away from launching a retaliatory attack on June 21st. At the last minute, he canceled it. So I was surprised to learn when I looked up this so-called drone that it has a wingspan bigger than a Boeing 737, and it cost $130 million to build. So the Iranians shot a drone out of the air that cost $130 million, which is more than a lot of aircraft cost. So these are very big elements, and that explains how one of these things could. Now I don't know. I'm assuming that the drone that was sent to take out this very important plant in Saudi is similar size. And that explains how you could get that much explosive and that size of a bomb onto one of these things, because it would be a very big bomb that would be needed to do that. And so these things are big. So they're aircraft, but they just don't happen to have any pilots. They're controlled by somebody sitting in front of a screen in some other location.
Now, a company in Vancouver has invented a system that can detect drones. They used it at the Abbotsford Air Show to keep drones away from all those expensive aircraft there. And they said they can even send out signals to disrupt the controls for the drone. Now, maybe that's drones that the civilians might have. I don't know how effective it might be against military-class drones. So there is a defense. And, of course, the Canadian military will ignore a Canadian invention and not deploy it, knowing them.
Exactly, so the thing is that they said exactly that in one of the reports that I read, that the enemy can jam the contact between the controller and the unmanned aircraft. But maybe these things take off, and then the controller sort of sets the destination on the GPS for where it wants the thing to go. Maybe they're willing to have a kamikaze drone where it just flies right into the facility with its payload of explosives, and so he never has to interact with that drone again. Once he sets it off on the mission with the destination programmed in, there doesn't. So then blocking the signals wouldn't do any good. But the Saudis are one of the biggest buyers of military equipment in the world, and Raytheon is the number one supplier. A U.S. company is the number one supplier of anti-aircraft ground, so they call them surface-to-air missiles. And so one of the questions about this whole thing is, how did they miss? How were they unable to detect that large aircraft? So assuming it's maybe as large as the one that was shot down in June, how did they miss it? How did they not protect against it? So you could see that the Saudis might be buying some more equipment in the near future. Or maybe they're mad. They'll get mad at Raytheon for failing to protect them. I don't know, but it's a major escalation. So getting back to the economy and the markets, what we usually talk about, it's important because it's a major escalation of the conflict with Iran. And Iran's 81 million people. There's a very sophisticated country. It's been around for thousands of years. It's not like invading. I think the Americans invaded Iraq twice and Afghanistan once in the last, 20 years. But none of those challenges would be anything like invading Iraq if they did choose to. Because one of the things that would happen would be that Iran would have allies, and allies, perhaps Russia or whatever, would come and join with Iran against the U.S. So it wouldn't be nearly as simple as just rolling into Iraq. I remember George Bush Sr., when Saddam Hussein pushed into Kuwait, they pushed the Iraqi forces back out of Kuwait and back into Iraq, but that was a pretty minor deal compared to what something like this would be. So the escalation is what kind of impact would it have on the economy is really hard to determine. The oil price surge that we got right after the attack last weekend didn't last very long, and it's mostly it didn't in the 12-month futures market, which is what really matters in terms of what people expect. There was almost no movement, so that tells us that the market believes that this facility can be repaired quite quickly.
Of course, that doesn't stop the gasoline retailers in Vancouver from immediately popping the price of gasoline here. When it comes to taking it on the chin, anything to do with oil or gasoline, Vancouver's the poster child for that. We pay the highest prices in North America, and not by a little, but by a lot. Why is it in Toronto they can sell gasoline for $1 a liter and obviously make money doing it? And here we are next door to Alberta, and we have to pay, $1.58.
That's why when you go to Vancouver now, you see so many Teslas. Like it's growing at such an exponential rate. It's like there won't be any gasoline cars left pretty soon.
Well, there are no gas stations in downtown Vancouver. All the real estate's been sold because the service station is worth more for its land than for its gasoline.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Hlliard, you've looked into the drones that were likely used for this attack in Saudi Arabia. What have you learned about them?
Well, I'm not sure because it's possible that if the Houthi rebels who claimed that they are the ones that did it actually were the ones that did it, possibly with the help of the Iranians, they might have been using drones. They're called quadcopter drones, 4 propellers, I guess. They cost as little as $1,000. They're using 3D printing to make them. They make them out of plywood. They're hard to detect on radar. And they're not particularly sophisticated at all, but they will carry a payload of some destructive explosives. And the option is so that when we were talking about Raytheon missiles, those defense missiles cost $3 to $4 million each. So somebody's sitting there about to push the button to shoot down these drones, and they're spending $3 to $4 million, and there's no guarantee that the missile will even be able to hit the drone because it's so small and it's made out of plywood. It's a really amazing story in the sense that it's complete mismatch, and maybe the defense people were reluctant to burn up a whole bunch of $3 million missiles and then they probably didn't expect that the drones would be able to accomplish their mission, but they obviously did.
Well, so these were homemade drones?
Well, 3D printing. I mean, anybody can buy a 3D printer, and but all they need is 4 helicopters. Now, the only part of it that's sophisticated apparently is the electronics, the guidance systems, and the research of one expert showed that they were using Iranian electronics, which is be very sophisticated electronics. But other than that, the actual making of the thing is just like anybody can make it in their own garage, as long as they had a 3D printer. Which is 3D printers? What do they cost? $3,000 or $4,000? They're not that expensive. So it's it's the classic. This is like a David and Goliath story.
Sure, and so basically, it's off-the-shelf technology, and we've already seen movies where you use dozens or hundreds of little drones. You can't shoot them all down.
Well, that was my first thought when I heard about this on the weekend. Was what if you sent like 1,000 drones in? You're gonna spend $3 million per missile to try and shoot down those drones, and you're still not going to succeed. And you wouldn't have to put the explosives on every drone. You only put like, out of 100 drones, maybe only 5 of them have the explosives, and the odds are at least 1 or 2 of them are going to get through, if not all 5 of them. And so it's kind of like a really low tech solution, and it could be. One expert here, just looking at some notes here, says that the worst is yet to come. They're just scratching the surface of what these drones can do, and
well, they can fly low below radar. They're so small they may not be picked up by radar in the first place. And again, shotguns would be effective, but are you going to be blasting shotguns off at these things? And the range of a shotgun, if it blew up, it probably would do the damage it was going to do anyway.
Yeah, so all they have to do is get a little bit more sophisticated, as we just talked about, doing swarms of drones. Then you can have a masking of radar signals, which requires more sophisticated electronics, and it could be a real problem to try and defend against these things. So this is the new era of. I've always thought that we're always debating about buying these F-35 aircraft at, I don't know, what is the number, 200 million each or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's old technology. We really should be looking at this new technology, which is.
Yes, and Canada's armed forces don't have any drone defense systems, of course.
Well, nobody. I mean, if the Saudis in this most important facility in the world, processing petroleum, can't defend against these things, I don't suppose there's anybody that can do that.
Well, there's a Vancouver company, I think I mentioned, that specializes in detecting drones and in some cases can disable them. So the technology is there. Is it going to be used? And until you see things like that spectacular attack maybe they'll think twice about not having an effective drone defense system.
It's going to be very interesting. Some opportunities for some entrepreneurs to make some great successes if they can get in early on this.
We'll have more with Hlliard Macbeth right after this.
Grand Portage Resources' Herbert Gold Project in southeast Alaska highlights increased gold resource, indicated and inferred, of 860,000 ounces, in excess of 10 grams per ton gold. Expansion drilling is planned on the Herbert Gold property for the summer of 2019. Grand Portage Resources trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hlliard Macbeth. Hlliard, one of the Trudeau election promises is to extend his new home buyer program to cover properties up to $800,000, so it would include cities like Vancouver and Toronto. Is this a good deal for new home buyers? Because at the end, if they sell their house, they got to give back a huge proportion of their profits to the government.
Yeah, I didn't like the program when it was announced. I understand why they did it. They felt that, I think everybody feels that it's affordability is such a big problem for Toronto, Vancouver, even Calgary and Edmonton. Even though prices have come down for several years, the affordability still isn't very good. So the government feels like they have to do something, so they have to announce a program. But it's unlikely. First of all, they've capped the amount of money. I forget the amount, but it's quite small. And it's complex, which is not good, and it basically is just creating more demand to keep prices from falling. So really, it's more a bailout of the developers who have, in some cities, have a lot of inventory that they can't move because the housing correction is starting to gain momentum. So basically, they're allowing sort of like who wants to be the last person to buy a house just before the house prices drop 10 or 20%, and so the government program is designed to do that, I guess. But it's very unfortunate. I think it seems to me that the way to solve this problem is to restore affordability, and the only way to restore affordability, well, there's two ways, but the best way and the only way that it's going to work is for house prices to come down quite a bit. In some cities like Vancouver and Toronto, have to come down 40-50% to restore affordability. And the other way would be for wages to grow fast enough so that people could grow into being able to afford to buy the average home. But that's not going to happen because it's really hard to get wages to grow quickly. And then that brings back inflation, and then that brings interest rates going higher, and then a whole bunch of people can't afford homes because the cost of the debt is too high. So for that reason, that second route isn't a very good one. So the first route is the best route, but there's a lot of people that will be hurt badly by house prices coming down. And they're older people, wealthier people, and they have a lot more clout with the government than the younger people who haven't bought a house yet, which who would be the main winners if house prices came down by the amount that I'm predicting. So governments will try and come up with programs, but none of them really are going to work. Or the one BC had one a couple of years ago, and it was similar, and it didn't really catch on, didn't really do anything much, and I don't even know if it exists anymore. So
no, it was canceled by the NDP.
Yeah, I mean, the take-up was really tiny. Like they allocated a certain amount of money, and only a tiny fraction of the money was actually even taken. So I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happens on this one. But prior to an election, you kind of have to be seen to be doing something, and I think that's what's happened here.
We'll have more with Hlliard Macbeth right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hlliard Macbeth. Still on the real estate front, Prime Minister Trudeau has floated the idea of a 1% so-called speculation tax if you happen to own a second residential property, say a cabin or a cottage, or as they like to call it in Atlantic Canada, the camp, although it's not really a camp, it's a little house or shack. Why do they think Canadians deserve to be attacked for owning a second property?
Yeah, I don't know. That's and the other one that he announced, I think, is the foreign owners tax, which is maybe a little more interesting. But I don't know why he would attack people's cabins. It's like that doesn't sound like a very good move politically. But I think it could partly be the idea that they want to help the lower income people, and probably 0% of lower income people own a second home or cabin that they use. It's really weird in Canada. You only get to use these things for 2 or 3 months in the summer, and the other 9 months they're basically useless. So I like the system in Europe where you go. We went to the northern part of Italy in the Dolomites, and it's basically bed and breakfast, but the breakfast is fantastic, and it actually includes dinner as well. And everybody in Europe pretty much goes for their 2-week holiday. They all seem to take either July or August. Somehow they've agreed who gets which month.
They get 6 weeks of holiday.
So the French take 1 month, and anyway, it all works out. And they go to the mountains, and they have their little rooms. They're not big rooms, but the utilization is great because you've got people filling these rooms every summer, and then in the winter they become ski destinations. So that makes so much more sense than people owning chalets on the hill and using them maybe 2 months a year kind of thing. So, but we like to leave, in North America, we like to leave all real estate items up to the private sector and trust in the private sector that it's going to allocate the resources fairly and properly. And it started about 40 years ago, and now here we are. And these things like you just mentioned, the 1% tax and the program to help new buyers, they're not really going to fix that. Because they're not big enough. Like this is a big misallocation of resources that's taken 40 years to build up, and it's a huge situation, and it's going to require very bold action. And I don't know if any governments are really going to be up to the task.
Well, Ross Kay, home ownership consultant that we talked to from the Wealthy Homeowner, he suggested the Canadian pension plan for a secure investment should build affordable rental housing and would secure itself an income of 7 or 8% a year from that affordable housing, and it would solve two problems: a secure pension plan and provide affordable housing. Is that a good idea?
It sounds like a good idea. And it's interesting you mentioned the pension plans, because I've noticed there has been a trend in every city in Canada, I think, including Toronto, but definitely Edmonton and Calgary, to the developers have stopped building condos primarily, and they're starting to build what they call purpose-built rentals. And there's several new buildings in Edmonton, and the developer gets it built up, gets it rented out, and then the pension plan buys it. So the pension plans are already allocating money, but the problem with this, what's happened so far, it doesn't fit Ross Kay's idea, because these are all luxury apartments, and they're renting for $3,000 and up, which is really crazy because how many people could actually afford to pay $3,000 a month rent? It's anybody who can afford to pay $3,000 a month rent can afford to buy a place. So as house prices have come down in Edmonton, for example, you wonder if those people are going to be very happy paying $3,000 a month. So really, what they need to do is to build a whole bunch of housing where the rents are like $1,000 a month, or even $700 or $800 a month. And in the past, up until the late 70s, the government was heavily involved in that, and really, there aren't that many examples of private sector. Actually, Donald Trump's family and Jared Kushner's family in the Greater Manhattan area were both involved in that, providing low-income housing. But the government was heavily involved with subsidies and different things. But there hasn't been much built for a long time, and the condo craze took over, and I guess now the high-end rental phase is moving into, but really I haven't seen anything yet that addresses the problem of cheaper housing for, lower cost housing for modest income people, which is really what we need.
Hlliard, anything else we should be taking a look at today?
Well, the interest rate, we've talked in the past quite a bit about the central banks changing interest rates, and the Federal Reserve is going to announce Wednesday, any minute now as we talk, the next cut in the interest rate. I think everybody's pretty much agreed it's going to be a cut. But one thing I just wanted to mention on that very briefly is that the central banks have lost control of interest rates almost completely. The interest rates are going lower and lower and lower. And in fact, some huge swaths of the government bond market have gone into negative interest rates, and even some corporate bonds have gone negative. Very, very large and stable companies have been able to issue bonds at negative interest rates, which up until a couple of years ago, nobody, including me, thought that was even possible. So, Japan always used to have interest rates that were like 0.5%, and we always used to marvel at it. I think, oh my God, what is going on in Japan? That's so strange, right? Now it's spreading all over the world. So, if the U.S. and Canada are kind of outliers, in that we've still got interest rates that are positive and actually fairly high. So, and that's where you get into that inverted yield curve. So, the short-term rate, which the central banks do control, Bank of Canada, Federal Reserve in the U.S., are way too high for the longer-term rates, some of which are 1% or 0 or even negative. So the central banks will cut their rates aggressively over the next few months, and it doesn't really have as much impact as people. The amount of time people allocate to watching what the next move is way overdone in terms of the impact of these moves. They're not really that impactful because most people don't borrow money at the overnight rate, other than just banks lending money to each other for settlements. So it's symbolic, if anything, but the rate, the move is definitive, and lower rates until we get inflation coming back. Lower rates are here to stay.
They were worried that the overnight rate, not the official one, was skyrocketing in New York. What is that, and is it something to be concerned about?
So there's this repo market, they call it. It's a way of borrowing money. You just basically, if I want to borrow money from you in the repo market, I give you some securities, and then I agree to repurchase them later at a slightly higher interest rate. So it's called repurchase, or they shorten that to repo. And it's basically a short-term lending facility that the central banks provide to banks usually. It's when things if there's a liquidity crisis of some sort where people for some reason aren't able to borrow from each other, then they turn to the central bank and borrow for a very short-term loan at the repo rate. And so if the central bank sees that the system is short of short-term reserves, it'll go to the market and lend it a bunch of money and make sure that there isn't any shortage. And the reason the central bank acted was because the short-term borrowing rate had shot way up, and they didn't like that, so they wanted to bring it back down because they're planning to cut rates on Wednesday, so they didn't want the rates to shoot up on Tuesday, so they jumped in. But it doesn't. I don't think it's like so in the global financial crisis. There really was a liquidity crisis because the banks got worried. Normally, one bank will have a little bit extra, and one bank will be a little bit short of money. So they have this interbank lending thing, which is usually only just for 24 hours, and everything works fine. Except in the global financial crisis, some of the banks got worried that some of the other banks were going to fail, and they did. Some of them did fail, like Lehman Brothers, and so they refused to lend. So then that was when the last time when they had to step in and provide liquidity on a similar way. So, but I don't see that right now. I don't see people worried about banks not, for some reason not being able to repay a 24-hour loan. So I don't think it, for everything I've seen, doesn't seem to indicate it's going to be a long-term problem. It was a short-term anomaly. But you never know. I mean, there's so many strange things going on now with negative interest rates and all this kind of stuff. There's a point at which if they drop interest rates so low, normally you'd think, hey, that's great. I can get a loan for 1% or 0 or minus 1%, which is even better. You don't even, they pay you to take out the loan. It's phenomenal. Except that people start thinking, wait a minute, if the rates are so low, there must be something wrong. Therefore, I don't want to make any commitments when there's something wrong, so I'm just going to sit on my hands and not do anything. And there's a point at which lower interest rates are actually counterproductive because they scare people more than they help people. And so maybe that's a sign that we're getting to that point.
Well, that's what's happened in Europe. They have negative interest rates, but people aren't taking out money. Like you said, they're scared.
If you want to look at housing market, go to Italy. The prices there are so low, and the interest rates are so low to buy them. I mean, it would be, instead of buying some 500 square foot condo in Vancouver for $1 million, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. You could go and get an absolute beautiful place in Italy with land and everything else for a third of that, and the bank there will probably lend you the money at a very low rate. So but nobody's doing it for whatever reason. People, maybe things are so attractive and interest rates are so low that people are afraid that there's something wrong, that they can't figure out what's wrong. So, but I think in the long run, that would be a better investment than a condo box in the sky in Vancouver that's trading at $2,000 a square foot.
Hlliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Nice to chat with you.
My guest has been Hlliard Macbeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. If you have any questions for Hlliard or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.